Tonight on Nation to Nation, Algonquins claim Parliament Hill lands.
True to this day, the Algonquins have never ceded their lands.
Kitigan-Zibi launches an Aboriginal title claim over Canada's capital. Youth rising.
We have developed these calls reflective upon the realities we face in terms of suicide and mental health within our communities.
The AFN Youth Council asserts its vision. Road to reconciliation.
We will move forward with the creation of a National Council for Reconciliation.
The Nation to Nation political panel dissects Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's announcement on the next steps on reconciliation's path. This is Nation to Nation. I'm Jorge Barrera. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today unveiled his government's next steps on a path to reconciliation. The Prime Minister announced the creation of a National Council for Reconciliation and new money for the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation in Winnipeg. Joining me now is Parliamentary Secretary for Indigenous Affairs Yvonne Jones, Conservative MP Cathy McLeod, and NDP MP Rachel Blaney. Thanks for joining us for this, the last Nation to Nation political panel of the year. There was a big announcement today. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Centre Block made the announcement marking the one-year anniversary of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's, one-year anniversary of the release of the report. And as he announced, there's a new national council for reconciliation that he announced. There's going to create an interim board, and we're going to also see $10 million go to the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. And he also said there's going to be yearly bilateral meetings with the Métis, First Nations, and Inuit. Yvonne, really interesting announcement. One of the things he said was that this interim board is going to define the scope and mandate of this council, but the TRC has already defined the scope. They want legislation to enact this. I'm just wondering why does the board need to determine the scope?
So what will happen with this board is it will include the previous commissioners of the TRC. That's going to be important for the continuity piece to be able to get an idea as to why they come to these conclusions, why they made those recommendations, and what their ideas and thought process was on implementation. It's also the real opportunity for Indigenous leaders in the country to get involved, and an opportunity for all Canadians to be a part of what is to be a truly reconciliation process launched by the Crown in Canada in partnership with Indigenous leaders. We're very happy about the way we've been moving forward in the last year.
Cathy, what did you make of today's announcement?
So I'm not going to object to it. The only thing I'm going to say is we need to start seeing a difference in communities, and if this leads to a difference in terms of suicide rates, in terms of poverty, in terms of reconciliation, then good, but we're going to be watching to make sure it does, because if it's just another forum for more talk and it's not starting to sort of help people that are in communities that are suffering, then it's not a good step. But I'll give the government sort of the benefit in terms of this may be a good step forward, but I'm not seeing anything yet that's making a difference for people in communities.
And what did you make of today's announcement? 10 million for the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation is a good thing. They hold the archives of the residential school history. What do you make of it?
Well, that's great. There's a first step here. But one of the things that we've seen in this government in the last year is a lot of talk and not a lot of action. So what I'm going to be really interested in watching in is what is this board going to have real power around? Because the reality is this country is built on systemic racism against Indigenous people. And the answer really is about moving legislation, because this can't be about nice people that are there today and what are we going to deal with tomorrow. It's about real change in that legislation piece. And so I think when you look at what's happened in the past year, we had a motion on the floor around making sure to end discrimination against Indigenous children in this country. We had support of it, but where's the action? Where's the money? Where's the resources? So what we're going to be really looking for is what's actually going to happen out of this. What is the action? What is the next step?
Now, coming out of last week's assembly, the Winter Chiefs Assembly, Prime Minister Trudeau talked about launching a process to decolonialize federal laws. And that same week, AFN National Chief Perry Bellegarde called for the reopening Constitution to put First Nations people within the Federation in a rightful place, because Canada was created without First Nations people at the table. Just wondering, what did you make of his call? And do you see today's announcement sort of maybe placating that that concern that First Nations aren't on the same tier as the provinces?
No, in fact, the process that's launched today is going to be a more inclusive process that will look very deeply at all of those issues. As a government, we recognize that there has to be legislative changes, and those legislative changes will come in cooperation with both the Métis, Inuit, and First Nations in Canada. And that's a big part of the conversation that we've been having. And so, it's very high on the agenda of government. It is definitely within the radar of the room in which we meet as government-to-government individuals. So, I'm thinking that we're all on the same page here. And it's really, we know that a lot of people in this country, including our government and First Nations themselves, want to move more quickly, and we want to get this done, simply because we've been waiting 30 years to do it, and longer. And so, but we also understand that there has to be a respectful process in how we make those decisions and how we move forward, and that's what we're doing.
Okay. Now, we're running short on time here, but I want to get to this because it is the last panel of the year. Kathy, you've been the Aboriginal Affairs critic or Indigenous Affairs critic for a year now. What has been one of the highlights of your time as a critic, either low light or highlight or an issue that really struck you this last year?
The committee that is doing this study around suicide, when we traveled, especially the panels of the youth that they talked, some beautiful young girls talked about being sexually abused. They talked about, it was certainly a low in terms of witnessing the terribly traumatic circumstances that too many young girls and boys find themselves in these communities. So that was certainly very troubling, and we're going to be wrapping up that study, and hopefully we're going to be able to make some recommendations to government. Again, I mean, it's great to have words in terms of what we're doing and where we're going, but if we don't see suicide rates coming down, and we don't see proper things happening that are really giving hope to these people in communities, and I think and economic opportunities, that's sort of another area. So I guess that was certainly a very troubling, and I think most of the people that were with us on that trip were terribly sort of troubled by what we were hearing.
Okay. Rachel, what's political highlight of the last year for you?
I think the motion that Charlie Angus put forward to the House, the robust discussion that happened around the House, and really understanding what's happening for Indigenous children across Canada. Seeing that motion passed was really inspiring. Not seeing the money that we're hoping to see come very soon was a little bit disheartening. But the reality is, I think the story of Indigenous people is becoming louder from the work that we're doing on our side of the House, and we need to acknowledge that, like Kath said, the reality is the suffering is immense, and if we're not actually doing action, we can talk about it as much as we like, we can consult about it as much as we like. It's those steps forward that are real action that will help change lives, help provide opportunity, because we want to see, they say it a lot of the elders in my community talk about, the cedar tree used to be so large that we could make one canoe out of it. Now we have to bring 2 cedar trees together to make a canoe, and we paddle together. So we need to see that happening in our government.
Yvonne, we're totally out of time, but I'm going to give you the last word for the first time this year. Just quickly highlight.
The highlight, I think, was when the Prime Minister said, here's $8.4 billion more in investment for Indigenous communities across Canada. That's how we're able to do more than 3,000 homes this year, take another 120 communities on reserve off boil orders, invest in young people, accept things like Jordan's Principle, the rulings of the tribunal, invest in children, Indigenous children across the country. So that financial ability allowed us to do many things for Indigenous communities that we could not do for a long time. And that's what we're doing, and we're going to keep investing.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much. That wraps this thing up, and hopefully we'll see you guys
Merry
next
Christmas.
year. Happy holidays.
Yeah. Happy New Year.
When we return, Algonquins claim Ottawa. Parliament Hill and several key sites in the nation's capital are under an Aboriginal title claim by Kitigan Zibi. We'll speak with the chief of the Algonquin community. This is Nation to Nation. I'm Jorge Barrera. Kitigan Zibi, an Algonquin community in Quebec that sits about 130 kilometers north of Ottawa, filed an Aboriginal title claim over Canada's capital city. The title claim specifically mentions Parliament Hill, islands on the Ottawa River that are the site of a new green condo called Zibi, and Le Breton Flats, which is a potential new home for Ottawa's NHL team, the Senators. The title claim comes as a rival group called the Algonquins of Ontario are heading toward completion of a modern-day treaty over the same territory.
Our First Nation, on behalf of the Algonquin Nation, file an historic Aboriginal title claim to downtown Ottawa. The claim actually seeks judicial recognition of Algonquin title and is a crucial step towards the fair, respectful, and just treatment of the Algonquin people and their historic and continuing connection to the Ottawa Valley.
Joining me now is Kitigan Zibi Chief Jean-Guy Whiteduck. Chief Whiteduck, thanks so much for joining us this week.
You're welcome.
So on December 7th, your community filed an Aboriginal title claim over the Ottawa area. I'm just wondering, can you tell us exactly what areas that this Aboriginal title claim covers?
Well, the claim, first of all, was filed by our community, but for a number of Algonquin communities in Quebec, so it's not only Kitigan Zibi. Our tribal council is part of this. But the area in question is the Le Breton Flats, Victoria Island, Chaudière Island, Albert Island, and we decided to throw in the Parliament Hill area because that is Algonquin territory, and we often hear the Prime Minister and other ministers say, welcome to unceded Algonquin territory, so if it's unceded, then there's still an Aboriginal title to it.
So what was the genesis of this? Why did, in your press conference last week when you announced this, you said, we didn't want to get to this point, but we have to do this. So tell me, what was the genesis of this?
Well, there's been ongoing discussions with a number of communities, including the Algonquin community in Ontario, regarding the development of Le Breton Flats. That's how this thing came about, really. Not getting anywhere with it, there's no formal offer on the table, some discussions, but it wasn't clear whether or not the NCC was the right body to really be consulting with us. And I don't think there was a clear mandate given to NCC, but there was ongoing discussion that was really getting nowhere. But we had looked at this issue for a long time with the Zibi development that was going to come about also. It's an issue we've been studying for a couple of years, not having met any satisfactory arrangement with Zibi. And then Le Breton Flats came about. We said, look, this is the heart of Algonquin territory. Ottawa sits right in the center of our traditional territory. And there's really no political will in the parts of government really to resolve the issue, given the present land claim policies that are in place, which obligates First Nations to extinguish their rights, and we don't agree with that. We think the policies should be modified to be more in line with recent Supreme Court of Canada decision in British Columbia, the Chilcotin decision. Clearly there could be arrangements made with First Nations that don't obligate them to extinguish their rights, but where we become real partners in Canada. It's our territory, we were here first, we have a legitimate ownership of the land, and we don't think we should have to sell out. We are a little concerned with AOO and where they're going with it, but that's their choice. Governments choose to deal with these people. We don't necessarily agree with what the government does, but we're more concerned about the area that belongs to all the Algonquins. All the Ottawa Valley territory is unextinguished Aboriginal title lands, because the arrangement made in the Royal Proclamation of 1763 was never dealt with us. The land had to be surrendered to the Crown. It never took place. We ended up being put on reserves and pushed aside. The only last time we were of interest is in the War of 1812, where we played a role. After that, we were forgotten about quickly.
So you've retained a law firm from Victoria that was actually involved in the Chilcotin Supreme, the Chilcotin case. I mean, they were representing Chilcotin Nation for almost like 14 years, or one of their lawyers was. So you've retained big guns on this.
Well, we looked around and wanted to get people with experience. We know it's a long journey. It was a long journey for them. We know that this firm has acquired a bit of experience dealing with the Aboriginal title, and we're lucky, not necessarily lucky, but we're effective at winning this case for the Chilcotin people.
So in your previous answer, you also talked about the AOO, the Algonquins of Ontario, and the Algonquins of Ontario is that modern day treaty is basically lurching towards a final agreement. Are you concerned that if this AOO, Algonquins of Ontario agreement, modern day treaty is finalized, it could limit your Aboriginal title claim, or will your Aboriginal title claim actually stop that AOO modern day treaty?
Well, the intent is not to stop anything. The intent is to really say, look, this is our land also, and you, Government of Canada and Ontario and Quebec, have a responsibility when it comes to our traditional territory. You can't just deal with one group in isolation of all the other groups. We are the majority of Algonquins in Quebec, over 12,000 Statusinians who are Algonquins situated in a number of communities, 9 communities in Quebec, and we can't just be left aside. We think that the governments must deal with us fairly, and they can't just deal with an isolated group that have been self-declared, as far as I'm concerned, except for one community.
When you file an Aboriginal, based on Supreme Court decisions, I mean, once you declare Aboriginal title, then the duty to consult, is triggered. Or I mean, it's triggered once you say this is, and then once you file. So now, the NCC in Ottawa and Ontario, in your view, are they forced now to consult with you, or if not, would they be contravening jurisprudence right now on this?
Well, we hope that it will lead to real serious negotiation when it comes to the development of, especially the Breton Flats and the whole area. We hope that the government agrees to come to the table and sit down with the Algonquins and work out arrangements where we're partners in development. The Breton Flats is an important area. We understand that. We're not against development, but we want to be a real player. We want that to have economic benefits for our people, in the immediate term and the medium term and the long term. We don't want to sell out our land, saying it's our land. There is room for partnership here. If there's political will, and the Prime Minister talks about nation-to-nation arrangements, well, this is a good time to start. Let's show that all governments can work together, including First Nation governments, so First Nations can have their rightful place in this country, not just stay on the reserve and collect a welfare check. That's got to stop. We have to be partners in the development of all our territory, and on extraction of resources and all that. We must be equal partners.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming in to discuss this issue. We're going to stay on top of it and see how it goes, because it's affecting a lot of developments in Ottawa now. So thank you so much for coming in.
You're welcome.
Indigenous youth have been taking the political lead of late. When we come back, we speak to the co-chair of the AFN Youth Council about his vision for the future. This is NationToNation. I'm Jorge Barrera. During last week's Assembly of First Nations gathering, the AFN Youth Council issued a strong statement on pipelines and announced it planned to launch a defense fund to support resistance actions like those in Standing Rock, North Dakota. Joining me now is Andre Baer, co-chair of the Assembly of First Nations Youth Council. Thanks for joining us, Andre.
Yeah, no problem.
So last week, during the AFN's Winter Chiefs Assembly, the Youth Council came out with a pretty strong position on pipelines. I was wondering if you can tell us how you guys arrived to this position and what message you're trying to send with it.
Absolutely. There's a lot of talk about the recent kind of stance by Justin Trudeau and his cabinet considering the Kinder Morgan and Line 3 Enbridge pipelines and the uncertain future of Canada as a whole, looking as pipelines as a way to better the economy and better the country. And taking that step forward really concerned the National Youth Council. It concerned all of us in our regions back home. And we knew it was something that we had to make a stance on, a formal stance on, with the young people in mind for the future generations.
Now, also, in addition to that, the Youth Council also announced the creation of a defense fund. Can you tell us a little bit about this defense fund, what it's for, and how the fundraising efforts are going?
Absolutely. Well, it started off with kind of a discussion with different chiefs in the assembly and some counselors, some leaders, and they were talking with the youth council about how we could really support Autumn Peltier and her kind of vision of having water protection and everything like that. And so Standing Rock, there was just a resolution on Standing Rock at the time in the Chiefs and Assembly. And so we talked about having some kind of water protectors defense fund where we can have this kind of capacity ready and available for when the next Standing Rock happens, because it's not a matter of if it's going to happen in Canada, it's a matter of when. And so we want to have this fund available for the people who are peacefully protesting and defending to protect water.
Now, Autumn Peltier was the 12-year-old water protector who told Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that she was concerned about the water, and she asked him to protect the water, and the Prime Minister, and she told him she was disappointed with his decision on Kinder Morgan, and the Prime Minister told her, "I will protect the water." Why do you say that Standing Rock is not a matter of if, but when it happens in Canada?
Well, there's not much difference between Canada and the U.S. in terms of an invisible medicine line that divides us, and the government's actions and their behaviors are very much the same. And there is no more urgent need in the United States than there is in Canada for us to drink water, because we all do it. We all need our water, and there's a lot of us that are very unhappy and feel unsafe with the stance of pipelines and what they're doing to our territories.
So looking forward into the new year, what are some of the priorities of the Youth Council? What are some of the things you'd like to get done and some of the things you'd like to see done?
The number one priority of the National Youth Council is to have our calls to action implemented. These calls to action were made when during the suicide crises that are happening every single day, especially in Saskatchewan. We just recently had 6 young girls between the ages of 11 and 14 who had committed suicide. And so it was a response to all of these suicides that were happening. This is our ideas and our views when we talk to our youth in our regions, what we would like to see in order for kids to stop killing themselves. And so these calls to action are being brought forward to the Health Canada, the Minister Jane Philpott, and the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, Carolyn Bennett. And we're both beginning just getting our feet on the ground of a working relationship together to seeing what we could do to implement them and help one another for First Nations youth.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Andre. I hope we'll hear more from you and the Youth Council in the new year.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jorge.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week and this year, but we'll see you in 2017 as Canada celebrates its 150th anniversary. Will Indigenous people also have an equal reason to celebrate? I guess in this case, we can really say time will tell. This is Nation to Nation. I'm Jorge Barrera. Good night.